This is Dr. Margarita Gurri, Dr. Red Shoe, with my favorite rabbi.
Rabbi Yonason Goldson.
And Rabbi, you and I were smart enough to invite Kimi Ziemski again to talk to us. Hi, Kimi.
Hey,
Oh, it's
I'm
Kimi.
delighted to be here.
I said it wrong.
Everybody does that the first time in a long time. I have old friends I went to high school with about a bazillion years ago. And one of them called me up the other day and said, "So Kimi." I said, "Don't worry about it."
Well, I think Kimi is a great name. Sorry, I misspoke it. So let's talk about the topic that Kimi proposed, which is something that I believe we touched on the last time Kimi was on. The rabbi and she were having an interaction. They were talking about the role of people in different communications, conversations, and processes dealing with ethics. And the question that Kimi poses us today follows up from that beautifully. What is the role and responsibility of askers and the askees? All right, Kimi, take it away.
Well, lately I've been noticing there's an odd sense of tension. And as a project leader, my team is in place to serve both a sponsor and a client. And that means that sometimes people on either side of that equation are unsure about how much power they hold. And sometimes the members of my team are unsure about how much power that I have given them. You hold a responsibility when you ask people to expand massive amounts of energy, massive amounts of their talent, and in some cases, massive amounts of inquiry because they don't actually know how to do what you're asking them to do, and they can't believe that you think they do. But now, all of a sudden, we've got this communications issue because the asker didn't necessarily think about what they are asking. The askee is now a little worried, a lot worried about what they're responding to. And everybody in the middle is saying, why do I get the feeling this conversation's gone right off the rails? And it's occurred to me, and I would dearly love to know, Rabbi, for example, what is it about the tension in asking between the asker and the askee? What is it about the tension of where the responsibility does or doesn't lie to say, gosh, that's not a good idea?
That is a really interesting question. And I think we could probably go on and on with it. There's so many different layers to it. And some of them we were talking about before we started recording. Often we don't want to feel like we're asking a stupid question. And, when we were kids in school, we were often told there are no stupid questions. I used to tell my students, the only stupid question is the one that's being answered while your hand's up waiting to ask it. Because, especially among young people, the hand goes up and the brain turns off. And the only thing they can think of is, and it's adults too, I'm so focused on my question, I don't notice it's being answered. So sometimes it's our listening skills. Sometimes it's our fear of seeming inadequate. Sometimes it's our lack of confidence that we can articulate the question that we have. And today especially, there is this pervasive fear that I'm going to say something that offends somebody. And that somehow my question will be interpreted as an attack, or will expose me as socially insensitive. All these layers just make it safer to stay quiet. And that sets us up for failure. Because it's one of my favorite movie quotes from Cool Hand Luke. What we'll have here is a failure to communicate. And that really, so many of our problems could be easily avoided if we would be more willing to speak, more willing to listen, and more willing to do the hard work of figuring out where the communication is breaking down, or that it might be, because sometimes we don't even notice when it is.
There's a quote from William White that is often attributed to George Bernard Shaw. The greatest problem in communications is the illusion that it has taken place.
Tell me again who said
And,
that?
William White, with a Y,
William
not
White.
an I. Yes. And it's always attributed to George Bernard Shaw. And I'd like to think that George Bernard Shaw attributed it accurately, but it seems to have lost that attribution over the ages. But I love that quote, because the greatest danger, I believe, that we as leaders stand in is the belief that because we have said something as clearly as we can, we've labored over the wording and the specific points at which we pause to let the points sink in. We've labored over that, or in some cases we just should have done. That communication has taken place now. I pronounced, you listened, we're good. Yeah. And I think that at that moment, when I see that happening, I inevitably put up my hand and just say, I am perfectly willing to sound idiotic, but I'm not sure that I understood it, which means there's got to be at least one more person here who doesn't. And I would raise my hand and say, I'm not entirely clear about what it is you want me to do. Usually
You've
because
had this experienced doctor, haven't you?
At least once.
Once?
At least once. So a lot of times when we're asking people to do something, it's maybe scarier than if we're talking about ideas or whatever, because the idea of doing something, I think, makes people wonder, do they look incompetent, like you were talking about, Rabbi, the appearance as well. So I think the idea of asking, I always just say, let's pretend I don't understand. Could you say it again in a different way? And you know what, even if I do understand, if I think other people in the room don't, but lack of clarity is always clear to other people, not to ourselves.
Correct.
My rabbi used to say when he was teaching, and then a student would offer a suggestion, he would say, I'm very stupid. Explain this to me so I can understand.
I'm very stupid.
And, it takes some of that tension away.
It is funny.
Okay, put it on me. I'm the one with the learning disability.
So that's one of the things that I think, Kimi, we were talking about before, that the responsibility of the asker and askee is to take responsibility for your process, adding a sense of humor, inviting clarity, asking for clarity, things like that. And I think it's something that sometimes we think it's just the person in charge's job to make sure we all understand. Well, that doesn't work, does it?
Well, at least not in my teams.
Yeah. I don't know any functional team. Hey, you have this great example, Kimi. Tell us that story again, please.
Oh, recently,
yes,
yes. And you had a phrase that I will now shamelessly borrow.
Please do.
Recently, a pillar of the project management community was in a conversation, and it was an open forum, with someone who was fairly new to the project management community and, well, fairly new to the professional environment to begin with, but had done enough homework to have a professional crush, if you will, on this person who's been a part of this professional community for decades. And so my pillar of the project management community said, oh, and made a request of our, brand new professional, to which the professional, and may I attribute the wonderful shrink, got bullied by his own admiration and said, yes, I will do this. And in the background, a colleague reached out to me and said, do either one of them understand how much time they've just committed of each other? And I wrote back and said, I don't know. I really don't think so. At which point I said, I was just about to ask, somebody else said, let me just make sure that I understand what it is because this is a wonderful research idea. And let me paraphrase it. Could you please tell me where I might have misunderstood something? And they blurted it out. And there was this dead silence. And even on these little bitty headshot screens of a virtual forum, you could see both of them kind of go into shock. And luckily, our seasoned veteran said, I can't believe I just asked that of you. And I didn't even check to see if you got the time or the bandwidth for this. I am so sorry. Let's meet offline and let's see what we can do about this. And in the meantime, the newbie was kind of like, because he started totting up in his mind all of the hours that he had accidentally just given his hero. And he was darned if he was going to take it back. Because as you said, bullied by his own admiration. And I thought, we as askers, we have, I think, more responsibility than we often realize, because we can accidentally bully somebody because they absolutely, you are the last person they want to say no to.
But look at the upside of that story, is that because people were watching out for each other,
Yes.
and because this pillar was willing to acknowledge, wow, I just really went off the rails there.
Yeah.
And he owned it. And so a potential catastrophe was averted in a few moments without any hard feelings.
Which gets back to a story, a comment that you had told us earlier about, and I am sure I'm not going to get it right, but something about not lapsing into sin when offering a rebuke. And
Oh, Rabbi, tell us that one.
yes, please,
was a good
because I
one.
remember thinking, wow, that is
The
such an
rebuke.
easy guidepost to use. It makes so much sense.
Yeah, there are a few layers here. The scripture says, you will surely rebuke your fellow, your neighbor, but don't bear a sin on his behalf. And the sages reformulate this, and they teach us to love rebuke. Now, of course, we all love rebuke, don't we?
Oh, yeah.
No.
We love giving it more than we love getting it.
I was going to say, it depends on which end I'm supposed to love.
Well, yeah. So why should we love rebuke? So interestingly, in Hebrew, the root word that means rebuke, that same root has the meaning of validate. Because if I rebuke you, what am I doing? I'm saying I believe in your ability to do better. And that can be an empowering statement if the rebuke is given the right way. But the end of the verse warns us, don't bear a sin, because if I don't give rebuke the right way, and that means the right timing, the right wording, has to be private, has to be with an understanding, and I have to be motivated by genuine concern and caring, not I'm on a power trip and I want to bring you down. Right. All of these factors, and in fact, our modern day sages say it is almost impossible to give rebuke in this generation. Because we are all so insecure, and we're all so ready to attribute ulterior motives and ill intentions, and that very few people have the capacity to accept rebuke. But if I'm in a leadership position, I have an obligation to do just that. But that obligation extends to how I give it, to create the best possible opportunity for that rebuke to be received, not just to be given.
Well, let's go back to what Kimi was saying. And I think, Rabbi, your story is just so very beautiful. I think that the context of trust, as Kimi was saying, and the trust, the culture of questioning. And I think that if you have that trust and respect and the practice of yourself allowing to be rebuked, or you rebuke yourself, how do you set the tone? So Kimi, you were referring to the rabbi's rebuke scripture. What had you in mind for that? Because I love where your mind was going with it.
Oh, good heavens, I can't remember where. Um,
Well, you could
What
just
I was-
start wherever you want then.
what I was thinking about just now was that the dynamics of a culture also, where there are leaders, there are followers. My good friend Oliver Lehman suggests that followers are the integral component of leadership, and that the followers bear a responsibility to make a wise choice in who they willingly follow, and make a wise choice about how they interact with their leaders. So while we started out talking about the responsibility of leaders in an asking situation, I tell my teams all the time, look, you're on the ground, you know what's going on at a much more concrete level than I do. And you're going to see things that I'm not in a position to know. My responsibility is to take responsibility for things getting done. Your responsibility is to make sure that I don't unwittingly make a crummy decision, because I don't have the information that you do. So part of my responsibility is to make sure that you are comfortable telling me if I accidentally start shooting the messenger. Because I'm one of those people who has her immediate reaction pretty much written all over my face in 10-foot high letters. You know, somebody comes in and says, Kimi, you know those components that we ordered? Yes. You're gonna be late. And my first reaction is something like, nuts! What's this going to do too? And it can, I've learned the hard way, it can come across as shooting the messenger. And of course, are you ever going to get important news that you need but do not want to hear from that individual again? Well, no. And I was so dense, I didn't understand my responsibility as a leader, that it got to the point where people would poke their heads into my office doorway, give me the news, and they were ready to run. They wouldn't even step into the doorway. They just kind of, you know, poke their heads in. And I remember thinking, what on earth is going on with that? And I asked somebody, and she said, well, you've gotten kind of a reputation for having an emotional response to things. And I said, yeah, well, that's kind of who I am. Surely they don't take it personally. She said, are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? Their next bonus is predicated on how well you as a team do. And you're going, yeah, they take it personally. And I realized I had not built the proper context of trust that I had with that individual who'd known me for 15 years and collaborated with me on 7 different major projects. So I'd like to think that at some point, everybody as an asker can have that conversation of, hey, what's going on here? But what if they don't have somebody like I had? A trusted advisor who can say, well, you know, frankly, they're terrified of you. They're really scared of you. Little old me? How could they be scared of me?
See, and I don't think you were being dense. I think you were being a naive leader. I think that we all think everyone kind of knows how we mean and how we meant to say that, or, you know, innocent me or whatever.
What we really mean.
Yes, what we really mean and how we really are with that Zoom filter of perfection, right? You know, I like to take that autocorrect Zoom filter wherever I go. I think that would be good. And I think that, you know, I forget who was talking about followership. I was talking to a military group, and we're talking about leaders. And I said, everyone in the room is a leader. So I asked, you know, who's a leader? And someone stood up and said, everyone here is a leader. I said, okay, should they stand up? Said, yeah, stand up. Now, I could have taken it away from her and had everyone stand up, but it was her idea. So how do we follow up with somebody and give them power? So she had everyone stand up. And the trick is she was right. Followership is leadership. So every leader shines only as brightly as the followers are willing to help them lead wisely, correct? And I think you have created a good leadership team there where they'd say, hey, Kimmy, you missed the boat. Oh, okay, thank you.
Yeah.
So I think that's very important. But I don't think you're dense. I'm going to defend your honor.
Thank
a
you.
little.
I
Not
appreciate
not
It's a
dense at
wonderful
all.
video. I think it's a TED Talk. I'm not sure. But it shows this fellow get up in the middle of it's a big open grassy space. People are picnicking and there are a lot of people there. And this one guy gets up and he starts doing a dance. And try to imagine the worst dancer you've ever seen.
Oh dear.
And that's what this guy's doing. Flailing around, jumping up and down. And you could see all these people, giving him the eye. And it goes on for a bit until a second person gets up and just behind him starts doing the same kind of dance. And very quickly, more people start joining until eventually you see everybody on the green spaces running to be part of this wacky behavior. And the point of the video is this guy who started dancing, he was just a nut job until somebody started to follow him.
Yeah.
And as soon as somebody started to follow him, that made him a leader. And once he was a leader, everybody else started to follow. It's a fascinating study in human psychology. We want to be part of something greater than ourselves, and we'll attach ourselves to almost anything once we become convinced that it's the thing to do. So if you have a responsible leader who's leading people in a way that really has value, and you have followers who commit themselves to that, that's when you end up with a really successful enterprise.
I would agree. I'm currently doing some study on the topic of connective leadership, which makes me feel slightly embarrassed to admit that I can't remember the name of the wonderful woman who wrote it. But her idea of connective leadership is that you must focus on the dynamics that you have as a leader with the people who follow you and therefore made you a leader worth following. And part of your responsibility is to make sure that you spot those moments that each one of them has where their leadership can shine through and where their leadership can make the team as a whole more powerful and more productive. And it's a fascinating idea that there is responsibility on both sides. And that's something I would like to see more people having a conversation on, that there is responsibility on both sides to make that equation work, that clarity is worth pursuing, and that just because it's news that you didn't really want to hear, like late deliveries, doesn't mean that you don't need to hear it. And it doesn't mean that it actually isn't going to be quite a blessing. Yes, thank you. Jean Lippman Blumen. Yeah. Amazing author. Very, very wise. And one of the things that I try to encourage my students to look at, my coaching clients to look at, is what is the price of a little short-term discomfort against the value of being able to make a so much better decision going on later. And yes, connective leadership, Jean Lippman Blumen. Yes, I highly recommend it.
It seems like such a no-brainer. I mean, what do I want? Do I want to continue making mistakes, or do I want to correct the mistakes? I'm reminded of a cartoon I saw years ago. The CEO is talking to his underling and he says, "I hate yes men. Don't you agree, Perkins?"
Oh,
Yeah.
I mean, the leader's job is to create a culture. And I mentioned this before, that when the High Court of Sages would convene to discuss a point of Jewish law, the first person to speak was the most junior member of the court.
Yes.
Because if the leader of the court speaks first, who's going to argue with him? But if you start with the junior and you move your way up, then everyone feels comfortable to agree or disagree. And of course, part of the responsibility of the head of the court at that point is to keep a stone face. Because if he starts nodding or he starts shaking his head, then that's signaling to everybody else what answer he's looking for.
Mhm.
And so the responsibility of that leadership is to allow the voices to speak their minds in a way where they feel comfortable doing that. You get the widest possible diversity of insights, opinions, points of view, and therefore you're better positioned to get to the best possible answer or the most truthful insight and evaluation.
And yet, if I may, Doctor, would you agree that our perspective about whether or not I want to learn to be more accurate, I want to learn to be more clear, can in fact be really rooted in the habits and social mores of the culture that we grew up in, our first organization, the family?
Absolutely. So our cultural background, our experiences, for all the different aspects of that make us male or female or somewhere in between, what culture, religion, refugee or not, all those status points. And it makes a big difference then what the role of the ASCII is. So the role of leader obviously is varied depending on where we go. But the role of ASCII is sometimes just to take it. And I think that what we can look at leaders and know that they're leading effectively for the particular group that they're leading is that ASCIIs can be like the rabbi was talking about, the junior rabbi who can ask the questions or share an opinion, because then you can have true creativity and implementation, right?
Yes.
So let's talk about the role of the ASCII. How come so many ASCIIs, besides cultural issues, are just quiet? Why do they say nothing to further along the growth?
It is, in my opinion, whatever the answer to that question is, tells you why truth to power is such an elusive and yet sought after commodity. It is resident in both the definition of truth and the volume of power. I am beginning to despair a little bit that we live in an environment and a time where fear drives so much of our behavior, that what we could take responsibility for, what we could be responsible for advancing, is not nearly as powerful as what we're afraid would happen if it goes wrong or if it doesn't go perfectly. And so I wish I had the answer to that question.
I think that's a great response. And yet, if they try something without ever spoken up, the ASCII, it's certainly easy to know who to blame. And that doesn't make it true, because if something doesn't work well, we're all to blame, right? It is all our responsibility. Blame is a reactive term. I'm not allowed to use it. It's socially not nice, but I'm using the word because that's what many people do. They're afraid to take responsibility because they'll fail. Not only do they not have the confidence to fail, knowing that you get up. I think, was it Denzel Washington who does this great commencement speech? And he says, you get up, you fall down 7 times, you get up 8. And it was beautiful, his speech. It's a rallying call to anyone to have the courage to be someone who makes a difference. And I think he speaks to your despair. And if everyone did what Denzel Washington said to do, I think I think we wouldn't despair because everyone would have the courage to step up and to help everyone else step up.
At one point, my late husband and I had an agreement, having both come from families with, well, shall we say, not overly abundant resources. And we had done well. So we put aside money because he had retired at that point, and I was significantly younger than he was. And we put aside money that he referred to as the Kimi Go to Hades Fund.
Hades?
Hades. I tried to get him to stop saying hell so much. So he called it the Kimi Go to Hades Fund. And it was a year of our expenses. So that if somebody asked me as a project manager or as an employee to do something ever again that I was not comfortable doing, that I felt was in question of, my belief system, or was asking more than I felt that they had a right to ask me to try to pull from my team, I could be completely fearless with my response, because I wouldn't be worrying that if I did say something and I did get fired, our house note would not get paid or things like that. And you know what the remarkable thing was? It gave me the courage to say the things I learned to say them a little softer after a while, to say things and question things. And I didn't get fired. I didn't get ostracized. Well, a couple of my colleagues did get taken aback. But when I left at the end of a nice long career, when I left, one of the people that I sparred with most frequently said, it's kind of interesting. You made a whole career out of being the stupidest person in the room. Because I would start the question with, look, I may be stupid, or I may have brain burped here. I think I missed something that connected this to this. Could you please, could you kind of connect them for me? And I said, and he looked at me, he said, we all knew you aren't stupid, right? And I said, well, in that moment, I wasn't paying enough attention. So yeah, I was being a little stupid. But it didn't mean I am stupid. It just means I was being a little stupid. But this is something I would like people to think about. What if you had that safety net? Are you that sure you would need it? Are you? Because maybe you're not giving the people who are doing the asking enough credit for their sense of integrity and fair play. And that's something I would like more askees to do, is to have a sense of integrity that gives other people the room to be better versions of themselves, and maybe we give them credit for.
I think
That's lovely.
was your late husband's name?
Walter.
Walter.
Yeah.
The Walter Fund. I think that's great.
Yeah.
I think that's so much
important-
nicer than the Kimi Go to Hades.
But I think that
tell
was
you to go to Hades.
that was a beautiful thing he did for the two of you.
So
Rabbi, what were you going to say?
It's such a compelling insight that when we don't feel secure, whether it's in who we are, or in the environment we're in, or in the financial stability of our lives, we immediately start rationalizing that we can't say what needs to be said. We can't do what needs to be done. We can't make waves. We can't take risks. And everybody suffers.
Mm-hmm.
The culture suffers.
Yes.
And yet I think there are some bosses and some situations, especially people who don't have so much power or education, where if they do say boo, they're gone, and then their children starve. So I think one of the in-between steps is if you can't speak to the leader who isn't leading in the Kimi way or the Rabbi way,
Or
maybe
the
there's
shrink
someone,
way.
or yes, and maybe there's someone else that they can talk to, maybe their partner, their life partner, or maybe the secretary, or someone who has sway with them. Sometimes it's the custodian, who in that organization does have the ear of this leader, that you could go to and express your concern. Either they could advise you on how to handle it, or they could whisper in the ear of the great and scary one, right?
Yes.
It's one of the reasons why there's suggestion boxes, but they only work if somebody's reading the suggestions.
Yeah, and if it's neutral.
With an open mind,
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
the suggestion boxes I've seen, they have a computer that anyone could type on, but there's a camera on it.
Oh my
And
gosh.
so you can't check the IP, you can't check, where it got sent from, but you can see them. So I think,
Ah,
how do we, so here's one of the questions: how do we solicit information that we as leaders need that will inform us on what we can do even better, or better if we're not doing them well at all? And how do we move forward? So I'm going to ask you to address that question, Kimi, but let's do the word of the day.
yes.
All right. So good, Rabbi, you have an interesting word, and I'm going to put this in the chat.
And the word of the day comes to us from Sarah Brzezinski, the Crackerjack